We're going to kick off section 23 by introducing what is actually the last big topic that we'll have in the entire global purchasing module, the integration of global purchasing with sales and operations planning. We spoke of S&OP previously. We're going to review some of the slides we saw in earlier modules and then get right into a conversation on the role that purchasing plays in making sales and operations planning activities a success. Harkening back to some earlier slides, let's refresh our memory and talk a little bit about what S&OP really is. The concept of sales and operations planning was first introduced in Module 3 of this training program. We know that. As a refresher, sales and operations planning is an ongoing practice within an organization that is used to measure the effectiveness in aligning supply with demand. That's a very high-level definition, but it is indeed true. Sales and operations planning compels companies to look at their performance in a given period, typically a month, and make adjustments to the supply chain based on what they uncover. To summarize that point, one of the main purposes of sales and operations planning is to identify variances, there's that word again, between forecasted and actual sales. And one can only imagine what role purchasing plays in helping to make those adjustments. There are several. We'll go over all of them. We saw a definition previously. Let's hit it again. Sales and operations planning is a multi-departmental business discipline that allows companies to synchronize product supply with customer demand. Designed as a permanent, ongoing activity, S&OP uses updated forecasts to convert high-level supply chain strategies into operational activities that include master production scheduling, material requirements planning, capacity planning, inventory management, purchasing, order management, logistics, and accounting. Basically everything that goes on in an organization. Let's review this paragraph. There's a couple of key points in here we want to cover in some detail. First, S&OP is a permanent, ongoing activity. Typically, S&OP meetings at least once a month, if not more. S&OP professionals use updated forecast, the difference between what we forecasted to happen in a period and what is actually happening in a period. That's where those variances are uncovered. Once they are uncovered, there's a ripple effect across the organization, and for an importer that buys finished goods from overseas suppliers, that ripple effect extends up to them in those areas like master production scheduling, materials planning, capacity planning. Those are all things that the vendors are doing in an outsourced production environment. And as we've stated on many, many occasions, the ability to share information with those vendors so that they can react accordingly in MPS, in MRP, is really quite important. Internally to the organization, areas that are impacted include inventory management. That's our responsibility. Certainly purchasing, what we're talking about here, order management, logistics, and accounting. Essentially, second paragraph, S&OP forces executives to constantly compare period-specific product forecasts with actual sales activities, and then make operational adjustments that reflect any variation between the two. That's a much more succinct way to state what we've been talking about up to this point. Whereas the specifics of the S&OP function may vary by industry and company, sales and operations planning is essential to making sure that an organization can achieve a balance between demand, inventories, and profitability. Think back to the slides we saw a couple of times on the seesaw visual that we provided, that balancing act between sales and investment in inventory. Who makes the investment in inventory on behalf of an importer? The purchasing department. This is precisely why it is so important that purchasing participate actively in sales and operations planning. What are the objectives and outcomes of sales and operations planning? And as we'll see in upcoming slides, what role does purchasing play in achieving those objectives and desired outcomes? Of course, we want to link our high-level strategy with tactical execution to go from 30,000 feet down to ground level in the area of sales, certainly purchasing, manufacturing, even though that's done by a third party, and how do we finance all of these operations? Sales and operations planning always reminds us of what our high-level strategies are and how are we effectively, or perhaps not so effectively, executing on those strategies. In the end, to state the goal a little bit differently, we're looking for greater alignment between the buy side and the sell side of the supply chain, aligning supply with demand. Through specific programs in supplier relationship management and customer relationship management, how do we share information between the two to make the necessary adjustments that do what? Last sub-bullet point, make sure we have, ideally, just enough inventory to meet orders without running out, and never having too much inventory that it becomes obsolete, we can't sell it, and we have to write it down. Some other objectives and desired outcomes of sales and operations planning. We're looking to create enhanced sensitivity to demand signals. We've talked a lot about demand signals in an omni-channel business model. A demand signal being an actual purchase or an actual order from a customer. Someone goes into a store and buys a product. Someone goes online and buys a product. Someone places a large institutional order with a salesperson. We've said this a bunch of times. These are all demand signals. When sales and operations planning techniques are in place, by definition, we are forced to look at specific demand signals. As such, we can create enhanced sensitivity to them. Over time, second bullet point, we're looking for more accurate forecasts. Ideally, we're using real sales and operations planning data to make adjustments to the supply chain. That's on the short term. But if we're seeing trends across periods of time, a given product is always forecasted too high, a given product is always forecasted too low, we can use that information to do what? Make our forecasts just a little bit accurate in the future. They'll never be perfect because forecasts are about predicting the future. But that sensitivity, that ongoing paying of attention to what's going on, will help us get at least a little more accurate in the future. Why is that? Sub-bullet point, because we're dealing with demand-based adjustments. Actual customer demand that helps us make these adjustments. The key point, talking a little bit about how purchasing plays a role, faster response to purchasing adjustments on the buy side of the supply chain. And we'll talk about what those adjustments might be in just a bit, but essentially, do we buy more of a product? Do we buy less? Do we add to existing purchase orders? Do we cancel existing purchase orders? That's what we mean by the purchasing department's response. In other words, ability to make changes on the fly. There are some caveats associated to making changes on the fly, especially in a global trade environment, but we'll get to those a little bit later. For now, let's say as a trade tip that on-the-fly adjustments, buy more, buy less, cancel a PO, add a PO, these types of adjustments to sales and operations planning are oftentimes made through the purchasing function. Purchasing is what represents the buy side of the supply chain. We are acquiring goods, or maybe trying to find a way to not acquire goods because a product isn't selling as well. We'll get to all of that in upcoming sections. What else are we looking for? Last slide in this section, improve sales. Of course, sales and operations planning is about making adjustments. If we make those adjustments, we can have more of the right product in the right place at the right time to sell to as many customers as possible. That applies to existing products, and hopefully we can apply it to new product launches as well. If there was ever an area where sales and operations planning can play a huge role, it's in a new product launch. Essentially, because after all of our forecasts and all of our analysis and all of our studies, we just don't know how popular or unpopular a product is going to be. Sales and operations planning for new product launches create that immediate sensitivity that we spoke of just a few moments ago. Second bullet, also as an objective and desired outcome, we're looking for greater control over product-specific landed costs and profit margins. As a part of sales and operations planning, we have to be looking at the financial side of the equation. It's not just about having the right product in the right place in the right time, although that's a noble set of goals to have. We have to do that profitably. S&OP should compel us to be looking at item-specific landed costs and the profit margins associated with them. Third bullet, tighter inventory management. That's the result of making adjustments to the supply chain. That balance between not losing sales but not having too much inventory on hand, or what's sometimes referred to as to minimize obsolete inventory, stuff that we can't sell. A direct result of sales and operations planning is tighter inventory management. In fact, no sales and operations planning team is complete unless there are representatives on that team from inventory management. That's essential. Buy side of the supply chain, we talked about this in previous slides, really the integration of purchasing with inventory management and sales and accounting, etc. All right, that section sets up the conversation for what we'll see in the upcoming section entitled The Integration of Global Purchasing with Sales and Operations Planning. We're going to get down to brass tacks as we move forward.